When millionaire Julian Mercer hires a quiet, unassuming assistant named Elias Reed, he expects a yes man. What he gets instead is a multilingual prodigy who dismantles power with precision and grace. Set against the backdrop of corporate Manhattan, The Tongues of Power is a fast-paced, character-driven journey through racism, redemption, and resistance. As Elias rises from being mocked in the margins to becoming the architect of a revolutionary startup, each chapter peels back layers of language, legacy, and identity, ultimately asking, what happens when the most underestimated man in the room stops translating and starts speaking for himself? If you like the video and subscribe to the channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The glass-walled office on the top floor of Solaris Holdings overlooked a Manhattan skyline stitched with ambition. It was 7:58 a.m. The rest of the office hadn't even started its day, but the click-clack of one pair of shoes echoed across the marble. Julian Mercer, 48, self-made millionaire and CEO of Solaris, leaned back in his Eames chair with a smirk playing on his lips. He was an oil-slick blend of tailored suits and sharper sarcasm, his every word delivered with the smooth cruelty of someone too rich to care. Born in Tulsa, sharpened in Harvard, and battle-hardened by Wall Street, Julian believed in two things: power and perception. And right now, perception told him his new executive assistant, Elias, was a joke. Coffee, Julian snapped, holding up an empty cup without turning around. Hot this time. Not whatever puddle you brought yesterday. Elias nodded silently and took the cup. He was in his late 20s, wiry, sharp-eyed, with skin the color of roasted chestnuts and the manner of a man used to being underestimated. His clothes were simple but crisp. He moved efficiently, without hesitation, without waste. Julian barely noticed him. Or rather, he noticed what he wanted to: the quiet demeanor, the faint accent, the way Elias seemed to linger in the background like a polite ghost. A nobody, a placeholder. You know, Julian said once Elias returned, placing the cup gently on his desk, I always forget where you're from. Are you African? Somewhere obscure, I assume. They crank out decent coders, I'll give them that, but not exactly conversationalists. Elias paused, then smiled faintly. I was born in Queens, actually. Julian waved dismissively. Sure. Second generation, third, doesn't matter. You've got that look. Like you've got an international discount attached. He chuckled at his own joke. Elias didn't respond. The door clicked behind him as he left, and Julian returned to his laptop, smug and unaware that something had shifted. It had started 2 weeks ago, when Elias walked in for his first day after a chaotic round of executive assistant resignations, 2 in 1 month. HR called Elias a contract fix, a temp with a spotless record and a thick file of recommendations. Julian had barely glanced at it. He only cared if the assistant brought coffee, answered calls, and knew how to stay silent when executives postured. But Elias wasn't just efficient. He was eerily competent. Calls were scheduled with surgical precision, files pre-organized before they were requested, clients impressed by the calm clarity of his voice. And he was always listening, really listening. On day 4, when a German investor called unexpectedly, Elias had taken the call, thinking it was for scheduling. The man had launched into a rapid-fire tirade about delayed documents and threatened to pull out. Elias responded instantly, fluently, calming the storm in measured German. He routed the call to Julian only after the man had been soothed into agreement. Julian never asked how he managed it. He just assumed Elias had Googled a phrase or two. But deep down, a sliver of unease began forming. That sliver grew sharper over the next week. When a Chinese partner misunderstood an email thread, Elias corrected it before Julian even saw the fallout. In fluent Mandarin. When a Ukrainian data analyst panicked during a Zoom meeting, Elias offered reassurance, in her native tongue. When the Spanish-speaking janitor apologized for vacuuming during a meeting, Elias replied with warmth and humor, and the man left smiling. Julian started to notice these little exchanges, but each time he convinced himself it was luck. A phrase picked up here, a coincidence there. He never asked. His pride wouldn't allow it. Until the boardroom incident. It was Friday. A major French delegation from Liontech had flown in for an investment partnership pitch. Julian had studied the materials, prepped his talking points, and practiced the 3 French phrases he remembered from college 20 years ago. They entered the conference room with crisp suits and colder smiles. Elias, as usual, was already there, setting up water and materials. The meeting began with Julian's usual charisma. He welcomed them, slipped in his phrases, bonjour enchanté, and grinned broadly as if he'd just completed a diplomatic coup. Then the presentation hit a snag. One of the Lion Tech engineers, technical lead, didn't speak English well. He tried to raise an objection in broken English, struggled, then turned to a colleague and spoke rapidly in French. Julian leaned forward. Someone want to translate that? I didn't quite catch his drift. There was an awkward silence. Then Elias spoke, his voice smooth and unhurried, in perfect Parisian French. He's asking if your proposed data protocol complies with EU privacy regulations under GDPR 2.1. He says the phrasing in slide 12 is ambiguous. Julian froze. The room turned to Elias. Eyes widened slightly. The engineer smiled, relieved. Merci, monsieur, he replied. Elias nodded, then translated Julian's response back in real time. The rest of the meeting continued with Elias casually, flawlessly interpreting the entire thing. Not just translating, but adapting, smoothing over rough cultural edges, softening Julian's occasional arrogance, clarifying technical jargon without missing a beat. Julian felt sidelined. For the first time in years, he wasn't the sharpest voice in the room. Worse, he hadn't even realized the game was being played until Elias had already won. After the delegation left, impressed and shaking hands enthusiastically, Julian called Elias into his office. What the hell was that? He asked, though he already knew. Which part, sir? Don't play coy. You speak French? Yes. How many others? Elias hesitated for the first time. Then, 11. Proficient in 15, fluent in 12. Reading, writing, speaking. Julian blinked. That's not, how? Why are you here? I was a linguistics scholar. Top of my class. I worked for a UN advisory group. Then a private equity firm. Then a startup collapsed. Family illness. Needed stability. So you're a genius who delivers coffee? Elias shrugged. Everyone plays roles. I don't mind being underestimated. It's educational. Julian looked at him, trying to read the man who'd just dismantled a facade he hadn't even known he was wearing. Something about the way Elias stood, calm, waiting, made Julian's stomach churn. For once, the millionaire had no clever comeback. Outside the office window, the skyline pulsed with power. Inside, a silent shift had just begun. Julian Mercer sat behind his desk longer than usual that evening, glass of bourbon sweating in hand, replaying the boardroom scene like a glitching loop. 12 languages. The man speaks 12 languages. He'd mocked Elias. Mocked his name, his accent, or what he imagined was one. Made jokes about countries he couldn't find on a map. Elias had responded with grace. And silence. Until today. Julian hated being surprised, especially by people he thought beneath him. And in his mind, beneath, covered a wide territory. The next morning the jokes started again, but differently. Hey Eli, my man, Julian said with a toothy smile, clapping a hand on Elias's shoulder as he passed. You sure you're in the right job? Thought you'd be translating at the UN or I don't know, teaching kids how to say hello in Swahili. He laughed at his own joke. Elias didn't. You know, Julian added, I saw a TikTok last night, some dude pretending to be multilingual. Guess you two went to the same acting school. Elias met his gaze levelly. I've never needed to pretend. Julian's grin faltered. Touchy this morning, huh? No, Elias replied. Just fluent in English too. The elevators opened, and in came the regional manager from Boston, Reed Cavett. Tall, red-faced, and casually racist in the way men like him had mastered coded language, fake concerned jokes that punched down. Julian. Reed bellowed. Man, who's the new polyglot? HR finally find us someone who knows what a verb is. Julian laughed. That's Elias. The mystery man. Fluent in half the globe. Who knew? Reed looked Elias up and down. Fluent, huh? I mean, sure. The help always talks fast. Elias smiled tightly. Only when the room's too slow to catch up. Reed blinked, caught off guard, then turned to Julian. You let them get lippy now? Julian chuckled uneasily. He's got spirit. Smart guy, apparently. Reed leaned closer to Julian, not bothering to whisper. Just remember, don't matter how many languages they speak, they still gotta listen when we talk. Elias didn't flinch. But Julian caught the tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, the restrained fury behind the professionalism. The incident happened the next day. Julian was hosting a midday lunch meeting with a German biotech executive and an up-and-coming Japanese investor. He didn't ask Elias to interpret this time, he expected it. And Elias delivered. Flawlessly. Until the moment Julian tried to impress the Japanese guest by referencing a proverb, one he butchered completely. The investor smiled politely, but Elias raised a hand. If I may, what Mr. Mercer intended was, even monkeys fall from trees. It means even experts make mistakes. Julian's brow twitched. What did I say? You said, monkeys eat trees. A beat. Laughter erupted around the table. Julian's face flushed. His laugh came seconds late, brittle and sharp. Guess I need more practice. Afterward, in the privacy of his office, the smile dropped. You embarrassed me in front of those men. Elias raised an eyebrow. You misquoted a language you don't speak. I corrected it. It was a joke, Julian snapped. Not a TED Talk. You asked me to help. I did. Julian stared at him. You enjoy this, don't you? Playing the genius. Making people feel small. I've spent a lifetime being made small, Elias said quietly. I don't need to return the favor. But I don't shrink either. Julian stood pacing. You're clever. I'll give you that. But clever doesn't win. Power does. You know what I see when I look at you, Elias. Elias didn't respond. Julian sneered. A suit that fits too well. A voice that's too calm. A resume that's too perfect. And skin that reminds people you weren't meant to sit at this table. The silence in the room thickened like smoke. Then Elias stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and said in a measured voice. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Mr. Mercer? Julian's lips thinned. A man terrified of not being the smartest person in the room. Who measures worth by applause and controlled by volume. You mock what you don't understand because understanding would require respect. And you've never had to give that to a black man in your life. Julian's jaw clenched. Elias continued. But you will. And with that he turned and walked out. Later that evening, Julian found himself in the break room alone. The janitor came in. Arturo, who'd worked in the building longer than Julian had owned the company. He greeted Julian in Spanish. Hola, señor. Julian mumbled something, then looked up. Do you speak Spanish too? Arturo nodded proudly. Julian hesitated. And Elias? What did he say to you last week? Arturo smiled. He told me I mattered more than the people pretending I don't exist. Julian sat back. Suddenly the world felt louder, more vivid. Like he'd spent years hearing only one frequency, and someone had just turned up the dial. That night, Julian opened Elias's personnel file for the first time. Degrees from NYU and Oxford. Field research in Cameroon. Papers on linguistic relativity. A fellowship with the UN. Letters of recommendation that read more like eulogies of brilliance. And in one scanned attachment, a grainy photo of Elias giving a speech to a crowd of students, hand raised mid-gesture, his face lit with quiet fire. Julian stared at it for a long time. The next morning, Elias didn't report to his desk. Instead, he'd left a handwritten note folded neatly on Julian's chair. There is a difference between being in the room and being heard inside it. I won't translate your words anymore. Not until you learn the weight of them. Julian folded the note slowly. And for the first time in a long time he didn't know what to say. Elias walked the city like he walked through life. Head high, steps measured, listening more than he spoke. Manhattan was a brutal kind of beautiful, loud and chaotic, but beneath the surface noise he could always hear the code, the rhythm of power, the subtle notes of inclusion and exclusion. He was used to the looks, the long glances in elevators, the micro-hesitations before a handshake, the way someone's eyes flicked to his skin before they processed his name, his voice, his presence. What he wasn't used to, what still stung, was how easy it was for people to shrink him. It had been 3 days since he left Solaris. He hadn't quit. Not officially. He just stopped showing up. No calls, no emails, no explanations. Julian hadn't reached out. Part of him had expected the man to call. Another part knew better. That morning, Elias sat in a downtown cafe, laptop open, earbuds in, reading research articles in German and cross-checking translations in Arabic. The hum of espresso machines and quiet chatter filled the air. A white man in a navy Patagonia vest glanced over as Elias typed. "You code?" the man asked, too loud, too casual. Elias looked up. "Sometimes. Didn't know they had many of you in tech. Where you from?" "Queens." "No, I mean originally." Elias smiled flatly. "Queens." The man chuckled like it was a joke. "Right. Hey, what's your real name though?" Elias sounds biblical. "It is biblical." Another pause. The man tilted his head. "You don't talk like the others, you know? Not black. Elias stared at him. "And what exactly does black mean to you?" The man blinked, sensing he'd wandered too far into something sharp. "Relax, man. It was a compliment." Elias returned to his screen. "Then you should work on your delivery." The man left, muttering under his breath. Elias sat still, breathing slowly, fists unclenched on the tabletop. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. Just tired. Tired of explaining the obvious. Tired of carrying the weight of other people's assumptions. Later that day, Elias visited a public library uptown, a place he often retreated to when the noise of the city felt too much. The librarians knew him. One Ms. Dewey, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair and a cardigan for every day of the week, always greeted him like a professor. "You're back," she smiled. "New languages today?" "Just revisiting old ones. Someone called here last week asking about you." Sounded corporate. "I didn't give them anything." Elias nodded slowly. "Julian." Back downtown, he made his way to a small bookstore/cafe in Harlem owned by his friend Anaya. She hugged him the moment he stepped in. "I heard about the Mercer fallout," she said, pouring him tea. "You okay?" "Still vertical," Elias said. "He tried to come after you?" "Not yet. But the silence is loud." Anaya leaned on the counter. "You're not just a black man in a white tower. You're a brilliant black man in a white tower. That's threat level red." Elias chuckled softly. "You're not wrong." He didn't tell her about the worst of it. About the regional manager. About the way Julian used his words as weapons dipped in politeness. About the slow burn racism wrapped in boardroom etiquette. About the elevator ride 2 weeks ago when a woman clutched her purse tighter as he stepped in. About the time a junior associate mistook him for a delivery guy. It was all part of the air he breathed. Inhale. Endure. Exhale. Repeat. That evening he received a call from a blocked number. He let it ring once. Twice. On the third he answered. "Elias." Julian's voice. "I need to see you." "No. Listen. Just, I'm not calling to mock you. Or command you. I'm asking." A beat. "Where?" They met in Central Park. Neutral ground. Julian wore his usual suit, but it hung differently now, creased at the edges, collar askew. His eyes were heavy. He looked like a man trying to hold something together with his bare hands. "I went through your file," he said. "Read everything." "You needed paper to see me?" Elias replied. Julian winced. "I deserved that." "No," Elias said. "You deserve more. But I'm not your judge. I'm just tired of playing translator for a world that doesn't want to understand me." Julian sat on the bench. For once he didn't speak right away. "Finally, you were right. I've never had to respect someone like you. I was raised to expect less. And I buried that in jokes, charm, power." "You buried it in supremacy," Elias said calmly. "You can dress it in wealth, but it still smells the same." Julian didn't argue. "You made me feel invisible," Elias continued. "Not just because I was black, but because you thought that made me manageable. Harmless. Disposable." Julian closed his eyes. "I don't want to be that man anymore." Elias stood. "Then stop speaking for people. Start listening to them. And when you're done listening, believe them." He started to walk away. Julian called after him. "Are you coming back?" Elias paused, turned slightly. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you need a translator," he glanced over his shoulder, eyes steel, "or a partner." Elias sat alone at a long wooden table inside a tucked-away co-working space in Brooklyn. Sunlight cut across his notebook, pages half filled with diagrams, strategy outlines, and sketched logos. At the top of the first page, circled twice, Polyverse Solutions LLC. Not just a company. A declaration. A global communication firm, built by someone who understood what it felt like to be misheard, overlooked, erased. It would offer elite language services, negotiation consulting, multicultural training, multilingual AI systems. Not just interpreting words, but decoding power. He had contacts, clients from old jobs who remembered him. Even a small grant from a Black entrepreneur accelerator in Harlem. Anaya was helping him build the online presence. It was happening. But still, part of him lingered. Julian hadn't called since the park. Elias hadn't expected him to. Until Tuesday morning when the knock came. "I didn't send a car," Julian said, standing awkwardly outside the co-working building. He wore no tie. Just a blazer and tension. "I didn't say yes," Elias replied. "I know. I'm here anyway." Elias crossed his arms. "Why?" Julian glanced inside the building. "Because something's coming. A deal. Big one. Diplomatic, messy, international. No one in the company can handle it. Not like you. I'm not your fixer. I don't want a fixer. I want the man who spoke 6 languages in one meeting and shut down a billion-dollar disaster before it started." Elias gave him a long, cold look. "And what's in it for me?" Julian took a breath. "Equity. A title. CTO of International Strategy. No more coffee runs. You get your own team." Elias studied him for a long time. "Then, I'll give you 1 day. But I walk if anything feels off." Julian nodded. "Fair." Back at Solaris, the air shifted the moment Elias walked in. Some staff nodded, grudging respect. Others looked away. Some still saw the same black man they'd always underestimated. He felt it. Always did. Julian walked him through the details. An Eastern European tech firm merging with a Korean blockchain startup. 2 different regulatory frameworks. 6 languages. 3 conflicting cultures. If it failed, Solaris would lose $120 million. Elias worked like a scalpel. Precise, fast, calm. He rebuilt the presentation slides in English, Korean, and Polish by lunch. He prepped scripts, rearranged seating charts to avoid cultural faux pas, even swapped out a team member who wore white to the Korean pre-meeting, a funeral color. By mid-afternoon, the delegation arrived. Tense smiles, cautious hands. Elias greeted them, in both languages. Pan Jankowski, Dzikujimi Zie Przybisi. Lee Sienhua. They smiled. Relaxed. Even Julian looked impressed. Everything was smooth. Until Martin. Martin Drescher, an old Solaris board member, walked into the meeting room just before the call began. Tall, leathery, country club white with a thick southern drawl and the confidence of inherited money. "Julian," he drawled. "Didn't know we had the intern running the show." Julian stiffened. "He's not." Martin waved him off. "I'm kidding. Kidding. I'm sure the young man knows what he's doing. After all, you people have good ears, right?" Elias froze. Jankowski looked confused. Lee Sienhua looked disgusted. Elias stood. Calmly. "You'll excuse me," he said. "I don't translate ignorance." Martin laughed awkwardly. "Don't be so sensitive. I'm just playing." Elias turned to Julian. "You asked me to come back. You asked me to be a partner. Partners don't sit silent when racism walks in the room." Julian looked between them. "Martin, get out." "What?" "I said leave." Martin scoffed. "You're siding with the only person in this room who actually deserves to be here," Julian said. Martin glared, then stormed out. The room went silent. Elias straightened the buttons on his cuffs. Then he looked at Julian. "1 day. That was the deal." And he left. Outside the Solaris building, the sky was overcast. Elias walked slowly, notebook under his arm. The day had confirmed everything. It didn't matter how many languages he spoke, how perfect he was. He would still be reduced to the color of his skin, still forced to choose between swallowing pain or walking away. He didn't cry, didn't rage, just walked. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Julian was there, suit jacket flapping in the breeze, no driver, no entourage, just him. "I'm done," Elias said. "I know. I mean it." "I know," Julian said again, quieter. "So am I." Elias frowned. "What?" Julian stepped forward. "I sold my shares this morning. Resigned my board seat. Effective tonight." Elias blinked. "You're quitting your own company?" "I'm starting over. I don't want to lead something built on rot. I want to build something clean. Something better." Elias stared at him. You think that's enough? No, Julian said. But I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking if I can walk with you. Elias looked away. The city roared around them. Then he turned slowly and kept walking. Julian followed. Side by side. No words. Not yet. But for the first time, Elias wasn't walking alone. 2 weeks later, the name Polyverse Solutions hung modestly on a frosted glass door inside a refurbished loft in Brooklyn. The office smelled like paint and potential. Exposed brick, sun-drenched desks, mismatched chairs donated by Anaya's community network. A printer hummed like an old refrigerator, and the Wi-Fi was stubborn on rainy days. But it was real. Elias sat at the main table, surrounded by white boards littered with scribbles in 7 languages, a mood board for the website, and 4 different contracts waiting for signature. His name was now followed by founder and CEO. And across from him, eyes lowered, pen in hand, sat Julian Mercer, Chief Strategy Officer. On paper. Silent observer in practice. You look like you want to say something, Elias said without looking up. Julian paused. I was going to ask if we should accept the Montenegro account. They're offering full retainer, but their history with labor laws is problematic. Elias leaned back. Do they expect us to clean their image or fix their practices? They weren't clear. Then they're out. Julian didn't argue. He crossed a name off the list. It had been like this for days. Julian showing up first thing in the morning, wearing jeans for the first time in a decade, trying to adjust to second place. He'd offered funding, Elias refused. He'd offered connections, Elias took only the ethical ones. Their working relationship was stiff, mechanical. No more mocking. But no ease either. Respect, like trust, had to be earned in layers. By midweek, Polyverse landed its first major contract, a California-based healthcare nonprofit expanding into Africa and Southeast Asia. They needed negotiation guides, cultural translators, and language-specific content workflows. Elias called in 3 old contacts, a Somali linguist, a Burmese code switcher, and a black trans interpreter who spoke 5 African dialects. All had been pushed out of corporate jobs for being too much of something. Now they sat in Elias's office, laughing, working, translating not just words, but worlds. Julian sat in a corner taking notes. He didn't try to dominate. He asked questions. Listen. Still, Elias saw the strain. The restraint in Julian's face every time he had to yield. The twitch of habit, still unused to someone else's voice taking precedence. That Friday, Elias found a note on his desk. Type. No signature. Thank you for letting me learn in your space. I'm here until you say otherwise. Elias folded it once, tucked it away. The next week, Elias was invited to speak on a panel at a tech conference, Language, Access, and the Future of Global Communication. It was an important step. Visibility meant credibility. Credibility meant funding. Julian offered to drive. I'm not your assistant, Elias said flatly. I'm your employee, Julian replied. So they drove. The venue was sleek, mostly white, mostly male. Elias wore a charcoal suit and a pair of cufflinks shaped like quotation marks, Anaya's gift. Julian stood near the back as requested. The panel went well, at first. Elias spoke eloquently about language as power, the danger of assuming English is neutrality, the erasure of indigenous voices in digital tech. Then came the Q&A. A venture capitalist in a blazer worth more than Elias's rent raised his hand. Elias, he said, voice condescendingly polite. You talk a lot about inclusion, but isn't your company a bit too niche? I mean, don't most global deals happen in English anyway? Elias smiled without humor. English may be the language of business, but it's rarely the language of truth. Soft laughter. Applause. The VC pushed further. But let's be honest, you're selling empathy. Not scalable strategy. How do you plan to grow past boutique work when your whole pitch is being different? Another voice piped up. From a startup founder in the front row. Also, I noticed most of your team is, well, diverse. Are you prioritizing diversity over performance? Elias's smile vanished. Behind him, Julian moved slightly, but didn't speak. Elias stepped forward. Come. I see. My entire team, he said, has been fired, dismissed, or passed over by people who assumed whiteness equaled competence. You call it diversity. I call it brilliance that survived. No one laughed this time. You want performance? My team translates between cultures that would otherwise collapse billion-dollar deals. They fix what your pitch decks don't understand. And they do it while navigating systemic bias every single day. Pause. Elias's voice lowered. We're not different. We're necessary. You just didn't see us before. The room went quiet. Outside the venue, Elias stepped into the cold air, hands shaking slightly. He hadn't expected to be rattled. He hadn't expected to feel so much. Julian approached carefully. You handled that perfectly. Elias didn't respond. Julian started then stopped. I wanted to step in. But I knew I shouldn't. Elias turned to him. Good. He looked back at the conference building. You still think I'm angry about you? Elias said. Julian blinked. You're not. I'm exhausted by all of them. You're just the one who stayed long enough to see it. He shook his head. Every room, every table, we still have to fight to sit at them. And even then we're questioned, challenged, mocked. Julian didn't argue. He couldn't. Elias started to walk away. Julian watched him go, then followed. This time not out of obligation, but because he chose to walk behind. When Elias turned around, Julian was there. No words. Just the quiet sound of footsteps that didn't try to lead. By month 3, Polyverse Solutions wasn't just real. It was rising. Tech blogs wrote breathless pieces. The startup that speaks 12 languages, and one truth. Clients were signing contracts faster than Elias could process them. Government departments. International nonprofits. Even a few corporate giants. That's when the attacks began. At first they came quietly. A smear article, anonymous and vague. Too woke to work? Language startup prioritizes identity over innovation. A suspicious delay in a wire transfer. Then a sudden tax audit. And then the emails. Elias opened the first one after midnight. The subject line was blank. The body said, You'll never be American. Go back to where you came from, monkey. His hands froze on the keyboard. He stared at the screen for a long time, then closed the laptop without a word. He didn't sleep. The next morning he came in early. Earlier than even Julian. He changed nothing in his routine. Poured his tea. Checked the contract. Reviewed a Swahili glossary. Julian entered 30 minutes later, holding coffee and a small brown envelope. You saw it? Elias asked without looking. Julian nodded grimly. We got 3 more. 2 to the company email. 1 slipped under the office door. All anonymous. All racist. All cowards. Elias didn't flinch. Any threats? Implied. Not direct. Still forward them to the NYPD. And the press. We don't hide this. Julian hesitated. Are you sure? It might make it worse. Let them try, Elias said. We've already been through worse. By noon, the building's security guard pulled Elias aside. Someone left this in the stairwell. A note. You think you're smart. But you're still just a black man pretending to belong. Attached was a fake news article. Polyverse caught in fraud investigation. All fabricated. Julian read it and snapped. This is harassment. Hate crime territory. But Elias only scanned it once. Then, with remarkable calm, he walked into the middle of the office, called his entire team, now 15 strong, into the common space. When they gathered, he held up the note. This, he said, is fear. Cowardice disguised as cruelty. They want us to shrink, to back down, to believe our presence here is temporary. He looked each of them in the eye. But we're not going anywhere. The room was silent. Then one of the interns, Kofi, a Ghanaian-American language prodigy, spoke up. We should translate the threats. Elias blinked. What? Kofi grinned. Into every language we speak. Post them online. Show how hate sounds the same everywhere. And how we're still here. Laughter. Agreement. Julian stepped back and watched as Elias smiled. Not the soft smile of diplomacy, but the hard, bright one of battle. The campaign went live the next day. Hashtag still here. 1 image per post. Each one a screenshot of the hate email translated into Arabic, Polish, Zulu, French Creole, Mandarin, Swahili, Farsi, and more. Each followed by the team's response. We read your hate in your language. We answer in our own. By nightfall the campaign had gone viral. The New York Times called. So did The Guardian. The BBC. Podcasts. Colleges. Civil rights groups. Suddenly, the hate didn't seem like a secret shame. It became evidence. Proof. Fuel. That week, Elias was invited to speak at a tech symposium in D.C., the kind of place that once wouldn't have known his name. He almost didn't go. But he did. On stage, he stood before a room of CEOs, investors, lawmakers, and told them what it meant to carry excellence on your shoulders while racism tried to weigh it down. He ended his talk with a single sentence, spoken in 12 languages. We are not guests in this world. We are architects of it. The crowd rose. Every single person. But the next morning, when Elias arrived at his hotel lobby, a man in a suit bumped into him on purpose. Housekeeping doesn't use the front elevator, he said. Elias didn't move. He looked the man dead in the eyes. I don't clean rooms, he said, his voice quiet. I build empires. Back in New York, he returned to the office late. Everyone had gone home. Except Julian. He sat at Elias's desk, looking out the window, city lights flickering like slow-fire constellations. You didn't quit, Julian said when Elias walked in. I don't quit. I would have understood if you did. Elias dropped his bag. Yeah. But I didn't build Polyverse for me. I built it for the people who were told they didn't belong, then built the future anyway. Julian looked at him. What do you need from me? Elias considered it. Not to save me. Not to explain me. He stepped closer. Just stand next to me when they try to knock me down. Julian stood. I'm here. Outside, thunder rumbled. But inside, Elias stood straighter. Unshaken. Still here. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. Subject: Confidential Acquisition Interest. The sender: Omnivox Global Holdings. Julian leaned back in his chair the moment he saw it. Elias, he said, spinning his screen. You need to read this. Omnivox. One of the world's largest communications conglomerates. The same empire that had swallowed 6 smaller language tech firms in the last 4 years, then gutted their teams and patented their tools. Now they wanted Polyverse. We admire your impact and are prepared to make a highly competitive offer. We're interested in acquiring all IP, staff, and trademarks. Full valuation. Immediate liquidity. Discretion assured. Attached. A preliminary offer sheet for $180 million. Julian watched Elias scan the screen. His expression didn't change. Do you want to hear my opinion? Julian asked. No. Elias closed the laptop. They don't want our tools, he said. They want to silence our story. Julian nodded. You're not wrong. And it's not just about ownership. It's about erasure. They'd strip out the language equity framework, rebrand it as a productivity enhancer, and fire everyone who didn't look like their board of directors. Elias stared out the window. Then we're not selling, he said. But Omnivox wasn't a company that took no for an answer. The next day, a journalist called Kofi at home. Another contacted Anaya's bookstore asking for records. A former Polyverse intern received a fake job interview offer, only to be grilled about Elias's finances. Then came the leaked documents. A Reddit post accused Polyverse Solutions of discriminatory hiring practices. They only hire black and brown people. It's reverse racism. They rejected my application even though I had better qualifications. The name on the post, Drew L. Julian frowned when he saw it. That's the guy who called Kofi urban during his interview. We should have rejected him. The story made its way to a mid-tier tech blog, then to a right-wing news site. And within hours, Elias's name was trending negatively. Tech woke warrior accused of racism. CEO Elias Reed's diversity over merit exposed. Is Polyverse anti-white? Elias didn't flinch publicly, but inside it burned. Every time we succeed, he told Julian, they try to make us ashamed of it. That weekend, Polyverse hosted its first language equity summit. A modest affair in a downtown event space with folding chairs, bright minds, and handmade signage. Community organizers. Black interpreters. Indigenous speech coders. Deaf UX designers. People who weren't just part of tech, but pushed it forward from the margins. Elias gave the keynote. He didn't read from notes. My mother taught me to pray in a language she never spoke in public, he said. My father negotiated job offers in English, but he dreamed in Haitian Creole. I learned early that language is not just speech, it's survival. It's presence. It's proof. Applause thundered. But afterward, as he stepped down from the podium, a man approached him. Late 50s. Polished shoes. Omnivox badge on his coat. He smiled too wide. Mr. Reed. Wonderful speech. You certainly know how to rally your people. Elias raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? The man leaned in. You're gifted. But let's be honest, you've created a niche rebellion. Eventually, someone like me has to clean it up and make it profitable. Elias stared at him. Someone like you? He repeated. Look, the man said, chuckling. No hard feelings. You're too talented to spend your life running a charity masquerading as a company. Come in. Cash out. Be a figurehead if you want. We'll give you a desk by the window. Pause. Elias's voice dropped low. Let me explain something. He stepped forward, closer than comfort. We didn't build Polyverse to fit into your empire. We built it so we never needed one. He pointed behind him at the summit crowd still buzzing with energy. And we're not a charity. We're a revolution with a business model. He walked away. Didn't turn back. That night, Elias was quiet. He stood alone on the roof of the office building, overlooking a skyline that had tried again and again to push him out. Julian joined him, 2 mugs of hot tea in hand. You should sue, Julian said. Elias shook his head. I don't have time to chase shadows. Julian hesitated. I've been thinking. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another overqualified assistant. Elias didn't look at him. And when I realized how wrong I was, I still tried to keep you small. Finally, Elias turned. But now, Julian said, I'm just trying to keep up. Elias exhaled. Then stay close. Because the real fight's still coming. The morning was silent, too silent. No inbox dings. No calendar alerts. Just a stillness that felt like a held breath before a storm. Elias stepped into the Polyverse Solutions office and immediately knew something was off. Julian was already there. Eyes locked on the screen. Jaw clenched. What happened? Elias asked. Julian turned the monitor. A video was playing on loop across 5 different social media platforms. It was grainy, clearly edited, but unmistakable. It showed Elias stepping off the conference podium weeks earlier, talking to the Omnivox exec. But the audio had been manipulated. Instead of Elias's defiant line, "We didn't build Polyverse to fit into your empire," the voiceover replaced it with, "We built Polyverse to keep others out." The framing, Elias as a reverse racist tech founder. The narrative, Polyverse was a segregationist startup. The source? A shadow organization with deep pocket ties to Omnivox's PR shell company. I've been on the phone with 3 partners already, Julian said. 2 are hesitating. 1 is pulling funding. And there are petitions floating around demanding your resignation. Elias stared at the screen. Come. Cool. Then he asked, what's our bandwidth like on the website? Julian blinked. What? Can it handle heavy traffic? I think so. Why? Elias was already reaching for his laptop. Because I'm about to post something that's going to break the damn internet. 1 hour later, the video hit. It opened with Elias standing in the middle of the office, surrounded by his staff. Everyone in the room held a small sign, each one written in their native language. Some held signs in sign language. Some in endangered dialects. Others in creoles, pidgins, and rare alphabets. Elias faced the camera. My name is Elias Reed. I speak 12 languages. But today I only need one, truth. He gestured to his team. These people you see? They don't just work for me. They are Polyverse. And no matter how you cut the footage, erase the sound, or edit the truth, we're still here. Unedited. Unbought. Unbowed. He held up his own sign. Read. I don't build for power. I build for presence. The video ended with a fade into the Polyverse tagline. Language. Justice. Legacy. By midnight, it had 12.4 million views. The fallout wasn't instant. The pressure kept building. Omnivox doubled down, releasing a new investigative report, smearing Polyverse staffers. Accusations of nepotism, false diversity quotas, even fake resumes. Julian stood in the legal trenches pushing back. He wasn't just present now, he was protective. He fired off cease and desists, organized meetings with civil rights attorneys, and negotiated face-to-face with scared investors. But the real victory came a week later. the tech journal FoundryWire released a counter-investigation. They'd uncovered leaked memos inside Omnivox planning a media discreditation strategy, targeting minority-led startups. Polyverse wasn't the first. It was just the one that didn't stay quiet. The story exploded. Omnivox stock plummeted. Their PR firm disavowed them. The CEO stepped down under scrutiny. Elias never celebrated. He knew better than to dance on ruins. Instead, he got to work. He launched a public-facing transparency portal, Truth in Translation, where Polyverse would publish every hate mail, every challenge, and every win. Open. Honest. They created mentorship pipelines, community language boot camps, a crisis hotline for marginalized tech workers. And Elias refused to be quiet anymore. He gave TED Talks. He lectured at Yale. He stood beside activists demanding linguistic equity in immigration courts. He partnered with deaf-led organizations to build better interpreting tech. People called him a pioneer, a founder, a firebrand. But he never forgot what they called him first. Months passed. Then came the night of the Language Equity Awards. It wasn't the kind of event Elias usually liked, glitter, gowns, uncomfortable applause, but this one felt different. It wasn't about elite circles. It was about the people who had changed what communication meant for those most ignored. Elias stood at the podium, holding a plaque with his name engraved. He looked out into the crowd. Julian stood in the wings, dressed simply, eyes proud. Anaya was near the front, wiping tears. Kofi stood next to a giant projection of the #StillHere campaign. Elias took a breath. I used to believe that speaking every language in the room would protect me, he began. But I've learned that being heard and being respected are not the same thing. He paused. I was mocked, doubted, and pushed aside. Not because I couldn't speak, but because of who was doing the listening. And still I stood. Still we stood. The applause grew. He smiled. Today we speak not just for ourselves. We speak for every voice that's been silenced, every accent that's been shamed, and every culture that's been told it didn't belong in the boardroom. He held the plaque high. We didn't just learn the language of power. We rewrote it. Outside, after the event, Elias walked alone for a moment. He looked up at the skyline. The city that once whispered he was an outsider. Now it spoke differently. Not louder, but clearer. Footsteps approached behind him. Julian. No tie. Hands in his pockets. You ever think about what would have happened if I never mocked you that day? Julian asked. Elias didn't look at him. You mean if you hadn't underestimated a black man? Julian winced. Yeah. Elias smiled faintly. Then Polyverse might never have been born. You gave me the match. Julian nodded. And you lit the fire. They stood in silence. Then Elias said, We're starting a second office. West Coast. You ready? Julian smiled. You still want me? Elias finally turned to him. I don't need you, boss. But I want you on the team. You earned that. Julian nodded. Elias started walking. Julian followed. Not ahead. Not behind. Just beside. This time it wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of the legacy. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.